Tell you the truth, this whole bloody mess, it gives me a funny feeling inside, you know? It's like, I don't know, how long can we hold on? I mean, World War III, it's a nightmare. The only people who can even think about it are the arms companies. You watch the financial pages. Those guys, they're gonna make a killing. They're greedy. Greed for cash they won't even have time to spend. I mean, don't people see the signs? Don't they know where this is headed?
Hey man, I'm doing some reading.
Nah, see? Apathy. Everybody escaping into a comic book and a TV. It makes me sick. I mean, all this. It could all be gone. People, cars, TV show, magazines. Even the word gone would be gone. See, news vendors understand. They get the whole picture. It's our curse. You see every damned connection. Every damned link.
Remember not too long ago when there was a whole kerfuffle about TikTok getting banned for stealing America's information and corrupting the youth? And before that, the news was using video games to fearmonger and blame for school shootings. And before that, it was violence in movies that was getting all the scrutiny.
Why the need for so much gruesome, graphic violence? Why not let us imagine
Because it's so much fun, Chan!
As you can assume, this cycle of using whatever new thing that's out there and kids enjoy to point at as a reason for our problems can go on and on and on. So much so that we can trace this 2025 TikTok ban all the way back to the 1950s and the comic book code of authority. Things in the 1950s were different, but sadly not different enough. While nowadays we're in the middle of a trade war, spending every day worrying about the rising prices of basic necessities and cost of living, back then they were in the middle of a Cold War, spending every day worrying about communism, scary communism. The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?
Senator, I'm Singaporean. No.
Back to the 1950s, comics were not only much more diverse, featuring not just superhero stories, but comics about war, romance, suspense, horror. They were also much more popular. 1938 through 1956 is known as the golden age of comics, where they were truly cemented as a mainstream form of art. Wizard magazine estimated that in its heyday, comics like Captain Marvel sold about 1.4 million copies per issue. And while comic book icons like Superman, Batman, Robin, and Wonder Woman also thrived, their time in the spotlight would come under great scrutiny. As previously mentioned, America was in the middle of a Cold War, fearing scary communists that want to change their way of living or something. All of this fear was coming from our government trying to push the agenda that communism was bad so that we don't question their authority, continue to fight their wars, no questions asked. And also uneducated people that fought to keep the status quo. The big push against communism turned into the Red Scare, where people started to believe communists hid in their neighborhoods, secretly plotting on the downfall of capitalist America. They got so scared that they started turning on their own people. Teachers, actors, film directors, and so on all started being accused of being communist spies. If you did anything out of the ordinary, you were at risk of being labeled a commie. But how did this affect comic books? During a time when comics were trying to be more subversive and tell more serious stories with mature content, explicit covers, exploring race and gender, they became the perfect victim for this storm of McCarthyism and juvenile delinquency that was about to hit them.
The Batman type of story may stimulate children to homosexual fantasies, or the nature of which they may be unconscious.
Robin is a handsome, effebic boy, usually shown in his uniform with bare legs. He is buoyant with energy and devoted to nothing on Earth or in interplanetary space as much as to Bruce Wayne. He often stands with his legs spread, the genital region discreetly evident. Man, what the hell do you got me reading, dude?
Bruce Wayne was rich. Several of the patients said they wanted to live with Bruce and be rich too. It is like a wish dream of two homosexuals living together. Wait, what?
Robin had no pants on! These are all quotes from the 1954 book Seduction of the Innocent by Frederick Wortham, a forensic psychiatrist, and a very ugly looking dude. In 1948, Fred was working in a Harlem clinic for teenagers where he noticed the trend that all those he were treating had comic books. At the time, everyone read comics because there was not much else to do, but like we've mentioned before, something's always got to take the blame for how kids act. Frederick argued in his book that comics were evil and the main cause for juvenile delinquency and sexual perversion in America. Superman was a fascist. Wonder Woman is a bad role model for young women because she's stronger than all the men around her, and also a lesbian, and also into bondage. Batman and Robin, whoo boy. Batman and Robin are not only in a gay relationship, but because of that, it's a predatory one, since Batman is the adoptive father of Robin. Ew. The book made all kinds of crazy claims against comics, with little to no actual evidence, intentionally misleading readers. When quoting the juvenile delinquents he used for his study, Frederick would edit the statements made by them just to support his claims. He would also use secondhand information provided to him by his contemporaries and patients' parents, without ever verifying the authenticity of what they said. While you might think a book with this many obvious holes in it wouldn't make a dent on comics, but this is the 1950s we're talking about. The comic book audience began to shrink as hysteria over them grew larger. It got so bad that there were public gatherings just to burn comics. This all culminated in a 1954 Senate hearing held in New York City, the heart of the comic book industry, where Frederick expressed that comics scare him more than Adolf Hitler. I hate to say that, Senator, but I think Hitler was a beginner compared to the comic book industry. Comics were on a downward spiral. With all the drama surrounding the art form, lots of comic publishers went out of business. According to Sean Ho's book, Marvel Comics: The Untold Story, 15 publishers went out of business after the Senate hearing, but the survivors of the witch hunt figured out their own way to keep going. Enter the Comics Code of Authority. Fearing government regulation, comic publishers decided that they'd rather regulate themselves than have Uncle Sam doing it, and created this organization that implemented all kinds of rules for comics. What were the rules? Ridicule or attack of any religious or racial group is never permissible. Nudity in any form is prohibited, as it is indecent or undue passion or romantic interest shall never be treated in such a way shall not restrain or ignore the represented as desirable. No comic magazine shall be explicitly and profanity, details, and methods never be presented. I've gone through so many websites and I can't find exactly who made up this body of comic judges besides Charles F. Murphy, who headed the organization in 1954, but with the exception of him, I couldn't find anything besides some hearsay from other comic fans claiming the CCA was made up of teachers and parents. Comics, just like so many other Americans in this time period, were bullied into conformity. Okay, so we have a comics code of authority to protect children from these evil gay comics. Now what? Well, with the comics code in full swing, romance and horror comics were on their way out, as creating those types of books that followed every rule within the code of authority was near impossible. Batman was under a lot of flack. Let's get rid of his gun, and also give him a girlfriend so people stop calling him gay. Let's also throw in a cartoon character to make things more kid-friendly. Great Scott, Batman! Somebody's been prowling around in the Batcave!
Sure, it's me, Batman! I've come to your world to join your team!
Superhero comics were the main survivors of the code's implementation, being that it was so easy to tell a superhero tale that bends to the comic's will. Readers were not blind to this, as they started to lose interest in the same old bland stories being told over and over again. Superheroes by their nature tend to limit the stories you can tell, said Sean Ho. The dumbing down of comics, alongside with the introduction of TV, more than explains why comic books started to fall off in sales after having sold 80 to 100 million copies each month 6 years earlier.
I'm not an elf. I come from another dimension where all men are my size. Batman, I've observed and admired your exploits over the years, so I decided to help you fight crime with my unearthly powers. Won't that be fun? I I made myself a costume and I'm calling myself Batmite. Oh boy! Will we have some fun? Batman, Robin, and Batmite. What a trio!
I like focusing on Batman for a lot of these examples on how the code affected things, as with him it's the most egregious. Batman started off as a gritty noir book about a man deeply rooted in the fact that his parents were killed right in front of him as a child, swearing revenge on crime and striking fear into any and all criminals to protect the people of Gotham. To the Rainbow Batman.
Robin, I must wear a different colored Batman costume each night.
We got a lot of insanely goofy stuff during this period. Who can forget such classics like Bat Ape, Bat Baby, the Zebra Batman, and the Merman Batman?
Yes, Robin, I have become a human fish.
Meanwhile, with Superman, great kryptonite. I came into the booth to change identities and I've become Super Fatso. Wonder Woman's stories in the 40s may have implied that she had romantic interest in other women. That was out the window. This was known as the Silver Age of comics, where superheroes took over the comic medium with all kinds of silly stories. It's also this era that really started to hone in the stereotype that comics are a disposable medium for kids, as telling stories within the regulation of the comics code made it so that a lot of the comics were very simple and very silly. Meanwhile, underground comics that didn't abide to the code rose in popularity. A lot of these underground comic writer and artists saw the comics code as censorship against unlimited artist expression. Underground comics included stuff like Robert Crumb's Fritz the Cat and Mr. Neutral, comics that can be characterized as rebellion against mainstream comics, featuring sex, drugs, and social commentary. But as the time went on, people's fears of communism coming in and brainwashing our children through comics started to change. As we entered the later stages in the Cold War, people weren't so susceptible to blatant propaganda anymore. The age of McCarthyism was coming to an end as a counterculture was starting to grow in the country. People who actually questioned their government and weren't as willing to go blindly fight a war. You could see this counterculture in the superheroes that were being born. The Fantastic Four were a dysfunctional family that would argue all the time, not exactly the perfect nuclear family this era pushed for. Spider-Man was a poor kid constantly down on his luck, evoking how many of America's youth felt at the time. The whole idea behind Iron Man was trying to make an incredibly unlikable person into a superhero, so they made him a war profiteer. Hulk's biggest enemy was a dude in the military. You get the point. America lost the war in Vietnam. Patriotism was at an all-time low, as the next big fear was nuclear annihilation. By the time the 80s rolled around, hostilities between the US and USSR had risen as the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in '79. In May 13th of 1986,
hey, wait a minute.
Issue 1 of Watchmen dropped. Watchmen asked the question, what if superheroes were real? An overused concept now, I know, but it was pretty new at the time. Steeped into the political climate of the era, the comic is filled to the brim with the fears and anxieties our country had at the time.
Sort of made some political points about power and the abuses of power. But I think my main intention was just to try and capture as accurately as possible the fear that I was feeling myself. I was feeling afraid for my children, for my family, for my friends, for myself, for my world. And articulating that was very difficult. I had to put myself through a bad couple of months to get close enough to that feeling, because it's so easy to hide away from it. It's such a terrible thing to think that the whole world could be gone in 4 minutes. I mean, I believe that's the average. A missile launch from a submarine, it would be here in 6 minutes. No warning. The truth of our existence is that the missiles could be in the air now. And that has been the truth of our existence since I was born. How do you live with that? How do you live with that constant threat of annihilation?
While in the Watchmen universe, the US had won Vietnam, things were still very tense with the USSR. Each issue ends with a white clock ticking towards midnight, similarly to how there's an actual doomsday clock made by scientists to predict humanity's end by nuclear annihilation. All our heroes and civilians that we catch up with constantly bring up how the world is ending. All that fear can be personified into characters like Dr. Manhattan, a being so powerful after an accident in a radioactive particle test chamber that he can rearrange atoms. A lot of people like to call the Cold War a dick measuring contest between the US and USSR. Well, in this universe, the US created a living god just to prove a point. And then you have characters like the Comedian, so wrapped up in the thought of nuclear annihilation that nothing matters. Why should it? We're all gonna get blown to kingdom come. It's all a big fat joke. This is why we see him commit the most vile acts I don't even want to bring up. He plays into the joke that is life with his nihilistic viewpoints to do whatever he wants, until the joke's on him.
Oh, Mother. Oh, forgive me. Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. I mean, what's funny? What's so goddamn funny? I don't get it. Somebody explain. Somebody explain it to me.
And then you have Ozymandias. This is going to get complicated if you haven't read Watchmen, but stick with me. Ozymandias puts an end to the Cold War by creating a giant monster and dropping it right in Manhattan for it to instantly kill millions of people. Claiming it was a monster from another dimension, the Cold War ends as nations come together in the wake of this tragedy to unite against this enemy that doesn't exist. We are saved from World War III and nuclear annihilation, but was it worth it? Did all those millions of people in New York have to die for the world to achieve peace? Did we have to drop 2 bombs on Japan for World War II to end? The ongoing pirate comic story reflects these themes too, as a survivor of a pirate attack trying to find his way back home slowly becomes more and more brutal trying to get his way back home. Every despicable act he takes is justifiable to him for the greater cause of getting home to his family, only to accidentally murder his wife upon his return. Was it all worth it? Are the grotesque acts of our characters justified in the name of peace? Are the grotesque acts of our government justified in the name of peace? Or have our heroes and saviors turned into villains? All of these are questions Watchmen asks without giving us a proper yes or no answer. One thing I found interesting while researching for this video is that I haven't found any interview or statement by Alan Moore where he flat out speaks on Ozzy's actions, but just fan chatter about how it really is up to the reader to decide. Watchmen was the culmination of all those years comics spent getting blamed for juvenile delinquency, silenced for exploring ideas people weren't comfortable with, forced to conform and tell repetitive, safe stories. While Watchmen is a story about superheroes and went on to have multiple sequels, prequels, and adaptations to Alan Moore's chagrin, Watchmen is meant to serve as the natural conclusion for this era of superheroes. Watchmen ignores the comics code of authority and explores so much more than just political climate. It deals with personal ideologies, the comic book industry. Superheroes are inherently fascist, but I just wanted to focus on the political context as this is a US history project. Watchmen proves that no matter how hard you try to silence anyone, whether it's a single person, group of people, or an entire industry, you can only silence voices for so long before they come back screaming in your face. I'm really glad I read Watchmen and didn't just watch the live action movie that lacks so much substance. Especially knowing the historical context that led up to it. The unfortunate truth, though, is that the same fear and hatred spread during the Red Scare that silenced so many comic creators and people in the country is still strong at work. Look no further than to those who try to spread awareness of the atrocities happening in Palestine are treated. An NYU student getting his degree withheld from him for bringing it up in a speech, Instagram and Facebook silencing voices in support of Palestine. In researching the past for this video, I found too many similarities to my present day. The powers that be may not be worried about spreading communism or comics making kids violent and gay, but they sure are worried about Gen Z learning and standing with Palestine.
The majority of Gen Z have an unfavorable impression of Israel. And my friends, I think the reason for that is that we're losing the digital war. Okay, they're getting their information from TikTok and whatever it is, and we're losing that war. When you think about it, the masters of the universe are Jews. You know, we've got Altman and AI, we got Zuckerberg, we got Sergey Brin, we got the whole group across the board. Jan Combs, founded WhatsApp. It's us. And we have to figure out a way to win the digital battle. Amelia, we got to get our digital sneakers on so that the truth can prevail over the lies. And when we do that, the future of Israel will be stronger because a majority of all Americans will support Israel. We'll make that happen. We have to make it happen. Thank you. Baruch Hashem. Thank you.
We may not be living in fear of nuclear annihilation happening at any second, but I know myself and many others feel a dread for this country that seems to be getting more corrupt, expensive, and evil with there being nothing we can do about it. Maybe Ozzy was right in the end. Or maybe during times like these, it's our job to stand up and never compromise. Not even in the face of Armageddon. Never compromise.